like the dads who are probably listening to this show right now, the fathers, they're probably wanting to be great dads.
Yeah.
They're wanting to be great fathers. So what's their fear? Most of the time, their fear is that their children are going to go to hell, that their children are not going to be saints, or their children are going to end up with a teenage pregnancy. They're going to end up like the world. They're going to throw away the faith. That fear right there can drive you into hyper religious domination mode, where you are trying to control your children, their religious decisions. You're trying to box them in, and you can, if they view you as a father, as a domineering tyrant, a controller, that's how they will view God. And the response from that, unless they're like got that docile personality, is rebellion.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here at another episode of The Catholic Gentleman. We are coming at you on the feast day of St. Maximilian Kolbe, which is one of our favorites. Sam has a son named after him. I have a son whose middle name is named after him. He's just such a phenomenal saint right here on the day before our Blessed Mother's Assumption. And so we are just grateful that you have taken the time to listen to us. And so who are we? We're your hosts. I'm John Heinen, hailing here from Texas. And we've got Sam Guzman. Sam, how are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you.
Awesome. And then Devin, you're up there in Iowa. We're just going to say Iowa in general. Don't want to.
No way. That's in Iowa.
Yep. How are things going?
Good. If I had a son, I might have named him Max. So,
amen.
Yeah.
Such a cool name. Such a great saint.
Man, it's a masculine
No
name.
Maxine. You could do Maxine.
No Maxine. Yeah. Maximus. Yeah.
Maxine, Josephine. So in today's show, we're going to go deeper into that constant question that fathers always have about whether they're raising their kids correctly, raising them to be virtuous and successful. But we also know that things like our emotions, our past mistakes, or even our current relationships often get in the way. I mean, what if your kids are just generally not respecting you? So today we've distilled it down to one huge reason that fathers fail. So stay with us. We also get to answer a question from one of our listeners about how to actually protect our kids in today's world. We love getting your questions. So if you have one, send it to us at podcast@catholicgentleman.com. I love looking through those questions every week and discerning which one we're going to answer and trying to align it to the show topic. If you actually do a voice recording and send it to us, we will play it here on air and then answer it. Again, if you've got a question that you want answered, send it to us at podcast@catholicgentleman.com. And if you are looking for more of this, if you like what we're talking about this week or any week, head over to catholicgentlemanplus.com, where every single week we're coming out with a longer, more extended edition. We are so thankful for our members. Every single month we're coming out with new sessions, new guest experts, new challenges for our members to help us become better men, become better Catholic men in today's world. It is a great way to support the apostolate. So if you're not already in there, go ahead, head over to catholicgentlemanplus.com. We've priced it accordingly so that it is affordable and that all men can take advantage of it. It's actually free for priests, religious, and seminarians as well. So if that's you, please head over to catholicgentlemanplus.com. And finally, if this is your first time listening to us, hit that subscribe button. If you've listened to us multiple times and you're coming back, awesome. Please consider writing us a review or just giving us that 5-star on Apple or Spotify. It really does help the algorithm, helps us reach more men. Men, we are all fathers here on the show, right? Collectively, we have 16 children among us, and we are very blessed to be fathers. It is something that we take on as our vocation very seriously, and we want to learn how to better do it. So we talk to each other, we're reading books, we're teaching others about this stuff, and today we just wanted to dive into one primary reason that men fail, and so I'm really looking forward to talk about why is this so important to our lives as fathers, because our relationship with our children is something that we enter into on a daily basis, hopefully. And we love our kids. We want to provide and protect for them. We want them to be successful. We want them to keep the faith. We want them to experience our love. We want them to respect us. And so within all of that, we find ourselves trying to figure out overcome our mistakes and how to become better men the next day. And we feel like we've got an issue here that we want to talk about. And so that issue, I'm going to just dive right in. No more setting the stage, just getting right in here. Is the truth is that the more you as a father fear being rejected by your kids, the less you will be respected. That's the less respect you're going to get. And so what do we mean by this, Devin? I want to just start with you and talk about why is this such a pivotal issue and why is this such a misstep that men make in life? Yeah.
Well, I think that respect is a double-edged sword. The very blessing of respect becomes a man's curse. And I think this often can be applied to fatherhood. So a dad lacks self-respect. He lacks confidence in God, because that's where all of our respect really truly comes from, is when we have confidence, that's con fide, with faith, when we are walking with faith in God, who God is and who he's created us to be. And we have that filial relationship that is from a son to a father and a father to a son. And we trust him, especially in who he's created us to be. Then we only look to him really for respect, right? But when let's just put it this way, when a man desires to be respected, but he doesn't have that backbone, he doesn't have that confidence in God, his children sense that, and this comes out in his decision-making, in his resilience, in his insecurities, inferiority complexes. So what can happen here is his children can sniff that insecurity and that unsureness or that irresoluteness in him. They can sniff that out. And if he wavers in the use of his discipline and authority, they know their dad is kind of weak. So the children will test his authority. They'll eventually disrespect him, and then he feels rejected. So then he offsets that by placating them in hopes that they won't reject him further. And consequently, he loses all their respect. So the more a father fears being rejected, the less he'll be respected. So that's kind of, I think, the idea here.
Yeah. And it's so true, because respect is so pivotal to the lives of men, right? It's something that we desire. We've brought it up on other episodes. I know you've mentioned that respect is often synonymous with love. And so when we look at this relationship with our kids and we're not feeling that respect, maybe we're feeling disrespected or underappreciated or these sort of things, we can often find ourselves just doubling down in the wrong way to try and get that respect, because we yearn for that love from them. And so, I mean, I think immediately, like what you're talking about here, is that we're still looking for respect in the wrong places. And I also, meaning in the other or in our children, but I also think that there is something at play here as well within the nature of respect, and we brought it up on previous episodes, is that when you pursue respect for the sake of respect, you don't get it. Very similar to joy or contentment, right? Like, we know that by pursuing virtue or the will of God or deepening our prayer life is what's going to bring us happiness. It's what's going to bring us contentment. If you pursue that, it's like an ever disappearing goalpost, right? It's always on the horizon and we're never getting to it. And I think the same thing with respect, just hearing what you were saying there, is that we, in that pursuit of respect, we find all of our failings highlighted, and we need to reorder our thoughts and our mind for this. So Sam, love to get your thoughts on why this is so important.
Yeah, well, I think it's essential that we recognize that most of our disorders in life come from fear at bottom. If you really drill down, there's usually a fear at the root of most of our unhealthy behavior. It could be a fear of a lot of different things: fear of rejection, fear of loneliness, or painting with a broader brush, fear of suffering, right? Like there's usually some kind of fear at the root of our disordered behaviors and beliefs. And as fathers, those fears can drive us to two extremes, broadly speaking. One is timidity, where we just check out, disengage, maybe bury ourselves in work, or maybe, we distract ourselves with pleasures or entertainment, but we're not engaged, right? So that's one extreme. The other extreme is domination or oppression, where you're approaching your children almost more like slaves, or like, these objects to be manipulated to meet your own needs. And it can be very hostile, it can be very angry, it can be very aggressive, and it can be very destructive, right? Both can be destructive, honestly. But the point being, this root fear of of being rejected can lead dads to manifest in their parenting in a lot of different ways. But again, there's that root fear kind of underlying that behavior. And so I think just realizing that on the path of growth, on the path of virtue, on the path of attaining your full human potential, who God made you to be, right? The fullest version of you, you're going to run into these fears.
Yeah.
And a huge amount of your growth is going to depend on your ability to face those fears, overcome those fears with God's grace, and often through little acts of courage. They're not often huge, daring, right? But it can often be little choices that add up to being the father that God's called you to be, being the man that God's called you to be, and that being reflected in your parenting, in your fatherhood, in your relationship with your children. So, yeah.
So, yeah, let's just dive in right there. I think that's really good, because if fear is driving us, what are the fears? I think on one hand, you've got dads who are like the dads who are probably listening to this show right now, the fathers, they're probably wanting to be great dads.
Yeah.
They're wanting to be great fathers. So what's their fear? Most of the time, their fear is that their children are going to go to hell, that their children are not going to be saints, or their children are going to end up with a teenage pregnancy. They're going to end up like the world. They're going to throw away the faith. That fear right there can drive you into hyper religious domination mode, where you are trying to control your children, their religious decisions. You're trying to box them in, and you can if they view you as a father, as a domineering tyrant, a controller, that's how they will view God. And the response from that, unless they're like got that docile personality, is rebellion. Eventually, either internally or externally, they're going to rebel from that kind of constraint. Okay. Now, the other fear, though, is on the side of most guys who are not watching it, is how much time do I have to really put into this?
Yeah.
I mean, give me a break. I've got my work, and I got to be famous, and I got to make a lot of money, and I got to work for retirement, and I got all these cool things I want to do. And the last thing I need to do really, or want to do, is actually pay attention to my children and invest in their lives. I mean, that's gonna eat at my personal growth, my personal success. So I think it's really good. So I think if we were to build a framework for this, excess and defect, according to St. Thomas, in the realm of virtue, you've got, like you said, domination and abdication. Domination is I got to control. I've got to be the dictator. I've got to make sure everything is done according to the way I want it to be done. And then on the other side, you've got abdication, where I'm just going to dismiss my role. And you know what? Let things just kind of take care of themselves.
Yeah. When I'm thinking about my own life, I have one daughter that is entering in almost to her teenage years, and that has presented a whole new challenge for me, she being my first daughter entering into her teenage years. And there's a real fear that she's not going to hear my voice anymore, that I'm going to lose her to the world. And with that comes all the things that we're talking about come out, and right, like it's not just this, because of this situation to my daughter, I am naturally always going into a dominating mode, but sometimes I do. And within my relationship with my daughter, I also find myself oftentimes placating her for fear that I am going to lose her love or lose her respect, honestly, right? Where we're trying to come back to. And so I think if there's one thing, and hearing you guys talk and in reflecting on this right now, is that it certainly is not easy. and dealing with every single child depending on where they are at their level of maturity, as well as their situation, as it currently is, and the relationship that you have with them right here and now is different and difficult. And that's why I find it so important to call out these two extremes, so that when they appear in your life, you can be aware of them. Oh, that's what I'm doing, right? Oh, yes. These knuckleheads on the Catholic Gentleman podcast talked about this. I remember hearing that. It's like there's these two extremes. Right on. And I think about that all the time. Yesterday, when thinking through this episode, I realized how I'm doing that with some of my kids. And it's just like, these are so good to just think through, but actually, I would say periodically stop and take an assessment of your relationship with your kids and where you're leaning. Yes, Sam.
Well, I was just going to say, I think what you just said is really important, to just name it, just acknowledge that fatherhood is really hard. It's really difficult sometimes. Like you said, meeting all of these needs of all of these kids at different ages, while also working on yourself, while also being a good husband to your wife that God has called you to be, while balancing work responsibilities, while balancing financial responsibilities, and there's just so much, right? But that's why we've done so many episodes on this topic, because it's something that we're constantly growing in. It's something that we're constantly wanting to inspire others to grow in, because it is a journey and it is really hard sometimes. But that difficulty can provoke so much anxiety, right? Where am I dropping the ball? What am I letting slip? I don't want to fail. I don't want to be one of those loser dads. Like, I want to maybe, parent better than my parents, or I really want to, be a father that my children look up to and respect. And, oh my goodness. And there's fear, anxiety. And it's like, you feel like you're letting something slip or slide somewhere. And so while we're really encouraging men to really strive and go after it, we also, I just think the point is good, that we should counterbalance that we do need grace with ourselves. We do need to be kind to ourselves in this project that is striving to be a father after God's own heart. And really begging God on our knees, like, God, I know I'm going to be imperfect at this. I'm going to screw this up sometimes. I'm going to react in ways. I'm going to fail in ways. Like, God, please, give me give my family the grace, make up for my deficits as a father, because perfection isn't unattainable. It really is. Mm-hmm. But absolutely, that fear can drive you to those extremes. And that's not what we don't want to provoke that. We're trying to remedy that.
Yeah.
Well, some things that should build confidence in us that we're, 50% along the way towards success is, if you look at the world, there are in America, I believe there's 64 million fathers. Of those fathers, 18 million, 19 million live without any father, adoptive father, biological father, stepfather. A quarter of the population of children live without any dad. If you're even a dad, if you're even a father, if you're present, that's huge. You've already gone 50% of the way. Now, if you're a Christian father, a Catholic father, you're baptized in Christ and you have the power of the Father's Spirit living in you through Jesus Christ, who stitched that Holy Spirit into you, that image of Jesus into you. Well, then you're even farther, because now you are operating in the image of God the Father, or at least you're supposed to, and that power, whether you like it or not, is in you. Yeah. And then couple that, or add to that every child instinctively, daughter or son, longs for the approval and the love of their father. So we're already 50% of the way there, really, on the basis. So God's endowed us with a lot of, natural and maybe supernatural ability to assume this role of fatherhood. Now it's that other 50%. How do we do this? And I was thinking, John, when you were talking about your daughter who's coming into her teenage years, she's probably finding herself. She's probably got an excellent mind like you. And she, a big part with daughters is they want to be heard. And they don't just want to be heard, they want to be listened to. They want a place at the table, especially when they come into these teenage years. And so what's so beautiful is when a father, he listens attentively to what his daughter is saying, he takes her seriously, and he actually affirms what she's saying in her viewpoint, that even if she's off, it goes miles. It kicked the can down the road 10 years, and she loves you because you respected her, you affirmed her, you listened to her, and you took her seriously. That's huge. Right there, that's huge.
Excellent. And I actually want to just go back to this extreme when we're not doing that, right? And this is what happens is when we feel our child underappreciating us or disrespecting us, going to the core of what we're talking about here, we have this ability to neglect our children, right? And so in that, and maybe it's just your emotions are up here and you're dealing with yourself, as Sam was just saying, and you're dealing with your work and you're dealing with, your relationship with your wife and your other children and stuff like that. And so, and the world, right? Like the flesh and the devil, they're all a part of this as well. And so when we're dealing with that, what happens, and I think this is good, let's talk real briefly about neglect here and different ways that it shows itself. And one of them is that you neglect your child by prioritizing your work, by prioritizing the wrong thing, right? If kids spell love, T-I-M-E, right? That which we're giving them, and we're not aware of that because have this tension or this divide between us, we can just neglect them. We can just take a step back and just, I don't know how to fix this. But the work is something I do know how to control. We've talked about that, and so we go in that direction. While at the same time, if we are somebody with means and we don't want to have those tough spots, we might find ourselves doting on them. We might find ourselves giving them extra things, or we might find ourselves avoiding actually correcting them because we're giving them time, but we're not actually correcting them, right? So that's another one. And then because I brought in the world, I think or the concupiscence of the flesh, if you will, right? We can be lazy and slothful. We could be we're so exhausted. We're finally getting home. We're finally sitting back. We've opened a book or something like that. And then we see our daughter kick our son. And it's like, now we've got to get back in and parent. And that can be tough. And so, but if you are just lazy and slothful and you just allow them to do whatever they want to do, you are neglecting them in that sense as well. So I'm glad to break down these different ways that it can appear. And again, this is not to overwhelm or to make individuals think like it's never possible to succeed. Grace is there. And I truly believe that within knowledge grows the opportunity and the ability to work with God's grace and to become a better man, the father that our children need.
This reminds me so much of what you're saying, John, of one of the first posts I ever wrote on Catholic Gentlemen.
Oh, wow.
Very early on. But I remember my son was like brand new. I mean, he was, I don't know, maybe 6 months old or something like that. But we went to the park, popped him in the stroller and went to the park, and we were just kind of pushing him in a swing, or I can't remember what we were doing. But there was another dad there, and he was on his phone. And the kid was swinging on the monkey bars, doing tricks, jumping off things, and he was like, "Hey, Dad, watch this." And the dad wouldn't even look up from his phone. He just kind of grunted, and the kid kept trying to get his attention, racing around, jumping off things. And finally the kid just gave up because dad would not even look at him. Yeah. And he just slumped down in the swing and just kind of sat there kind of looking dejected. And it's devastating, and they did an experiment in Japan, Japanese scientists did, and it was so fascinating. Basically they put rice and water in a jar and for, it was like 3 or 4 weeks. Okay. And they did 3 things. On one jar, they spoke hateful words to the rice. You're an idiot, you're a fool, you're a loser, whatever. To the second jar, they said loving and grateful things like you're beautiful, I love you, or whatever. The third one, they completely ignored. They didn't say anything. And at the end of the experiment, the first jar that they said hateful things to was kind of grungy and like looked like it was starting to ferment and like do ugly things. And then the second one had it started to sprout and grow. And then the third one was the worst of all. The one that had been ignored was the worst of all and had like completely putrefied and just decayed and just died. And so the point being, yeah, you neglect your responsibilities, you ignore your kids, it can actually do more damage than losing your temper once in a while or like, I'm not saying those are good things, but I'm just saying like it actually does more damage to pretend like your kids don't exist. That's just absolutely devastating to any child.
Yeah. We need to be present to our kids like white on rice. No, that's quite a story. I've never heard that. I appreciate you sharing that. I had to make that up.
The blog post, if anyone wants to look it up, is called "The Father Who Is There."
Amen. Well, no, this is really good. Devin, any additional thoughts to the form of neglect? Because I do want to spend some time talking about the tyrant as well, this dictator.
Yeah, abdication versus domination. So abdication, just so that the people watching or listening can have some kind of a framework to examine themselves in an easy way. There's just 4, D's. The distracted dad, like both John and Sam talked about. The doting dad, this is the dad, he overindulgent, babies his kids, few rules. He's, it's just whatever they want to do. And then you got the dismissive dad, the kid just isn't worthy of his time, as Sam was saying, looking at his phone, grunting, not even paying attention, affirming his child. And then the delicate dad, the dad who's effeminate, lazy, slothful. He doesn't demonstrate any kind of strength or strong work ethic or any kind of strong moral backbone. So you've got distracted, doting, dismissive, and delicate dad. So I think that's a good framework to examine ourselves on the abdication side. Say, hey, am I any one of those? And generally, at least me, I find I'm in there somewhere.
Me too, exactly. And I think that's what I was trying to get at early. I love those 4, and I came up with them or similar ones myself. And I would just say that in some way, shape, or form, I've been all of them. Depending on the child, depending on the situation, depending on the life and the stresses of my own life. And so, being aware of those, and then we'll talk about it in just a little bit here, how to counteract that. Yeah.
And I was just thinking, Sam, when you're talking about the rice experiment, I mean, this goes deep because just my own personal experience of just like not having that presence of a father, on a day-to-day basis, no calls, no texting, no visiting, man, it can play with your mind, especially when bad things happen. I remember one time when I was doing a plumbing project in my basement, and I woke up the next morning, the basement was flooded. And the first thing I like, Dad, where are you? It's like I was blaming my dad because he didn't teach me. He wasn't involved in my life. He didn't come over and help or whatever, but then we transpose that on the Heavenly Father. Dad, where are you? And that's where it becomes very dangerous because what I'm saying to everyone who's listening is this is serious because it goes so deep into your kid's heart. If you are not really present, if you are the abdicating dad, your child will grow up with a daddy wound that'll take almost the rest of his life to ever heal and figure out.
Such a good point. So on the flip of that, and correct me or add nuances to it, we've got the dictator, the tyrant father, which we've likely all been. I find personally, for me, that comes up when I've allowed my emotions to just kind of run rampant. When I allow my emotions of anger or my desire to control, or that frustration with getting it wrong or not getting the response. Ooh, there's one right there. Not getting the response that I want.
Disrespected.
Exactly. You feel that disrespect. So true. I'm actually glad that I just mentioned that. Yeah. And you just mentioned, because that's the truth. That happens more frequently than I care to admit, that if I order, and our kids need a mature father, right? They need when their lives are in chaos and their emotions are in chaos and their maturity is in chaos because they're kids, they need the father who is stable. And I remind myself this on a daily basis because I want to rise to that occasion. When I order them to do something and they ignore me, or I order them to do something and they directly disobey me, I mean, that charges me, right? And so then I'll threaten them with a discipline, right?
Yeah.
And if I don't get the response I want, I threaten them with a bigger discipline, and it's this cycle. It's a bad cycle of a tyrant father. And so I don't mind being honest because, listeners here, we're not, saints ourselves. So.
Oh, it's great. I think though, on that whole idea of threatening, I learned a long time ago, just do it. Don't tell them what you're going to do. Just do it. And then they're so shocked that you did whatever you did, like as far as a punishment, that they're like, I don't know what he's going to do next. It's kind of like, so I think on that side, I'm not saying you're like, doing anything terrible, but I'm just saying that without the warning and the escalated warnings and all this stuff, because eventually the kid just tunes you out and is like, oh gosh, he's just a big, windbag.
Our kids are smart in that sense. Absolutely. No 3 strikes and you're out parenting. I agree. I think that's just way too much leeway. And then honestly, it's leaning a little bit into the laziness. Sam, you were going to say something.
No, I was just taking in everything, but I guess though, I will just add, one thing that might be helpful as you're kind of examining yourself and examining your behavior as a father is to examine your relationship to yourself, your inner child. And you guys are probably like, what? Inner child? Like, what is this guy? And like, but hear me out. Like, we often tolerate least in our children what we least tolerate in ourselves. And how do you feel about young you? Oh, he was weak. He was pathetic. He didn't know how to stand up for himself. He was a terrible kid, we have this inner critic, this inner judge that goes after, our weak, confused self sometimes, as when we were kids. And then our kids do the same things that we did. And then that inner critic comes out at them, right? We lash out at them because we're intolerant of the way we were as children. Or maybe we felt we should have been better, or like that shame that we carry can often, we see it in our kids. We see ourselves in our kids and we say, I don't like that. That's an ugly look, and like, I'm going to set him straight, and then we lash out at our kids, right? For doing the same things that we did as kids. But that we find intolerable now. And so honestly, like going back and reconciling yourself with your younger self, it can be actually a very healthy, healing exercise. And chances are, like, the rejection you feel from yourself, is translating to your kids. And the more you ease up on that, the more you reconcile with your own failures as a child, with your own weakness as a child, with your own confusion, your own helplessness, your own disobedience, your own rebellion, like all of those things, you can work through that. Your relationship with your kids will improve measurably.
Yeah. Excellent. And I think this goes to something, Devin, you were saying earlier, is just that inner respect of ourselves, right? When we don't have that respect for ourselves, when we realize that we're failing and we're struggling, and I like this sort of healing process that you're talking about here, Sam, where we can go back to the root, and we can start that healing journey for ourselves. I think is something that we all need to do and be proactively discerning within our lives. So I want to actually move. I want to talk about, so we've got these two extremes that we just talked about. Let's talk about the middle. And, we've got the fun little phrases like love without discipline is neglect and discipline without love is abuse. We've got this meta narrative of love by leading and lead by loving, right? But this is really what we're called to do as men. And I always like, if you check out Fathers of St. Joseph, Devin's ministry, there's always these like crosses, and he's got these great diagrams because that's what we're called to be, right? We're called to be in the means. We're called to be in the middle. We don't want to be those extremes. We want to be the individual, the father that is present, the father that kids can hear his voice. Like that was one thing thing I wanted to talk about is that they obey his voice. They hear his voice. We hear that all the time in Scripture from Christ, talking about his sheep hear him. We talk in Deuteronomy, God talks about obeying. And if you obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments, which I command you on this day, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations. But at the same time, there's also consequences for disobedience. There's consequences for these sort of things. And so we are looking to be in that middle road where we both love, but we discipline and we order our kids' lives and their character correctly without losing control of ourselves. And so I do want to spend a little bit of time here in the last few minutes to talk about that. And so, Devin, love to hear additional thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think the balance between domination and abdication, at least the golden mean, is charitable authority. As you said, to love by leading and lead by loving. And so what that means is that every man must understand that God, through his very office of fatherhood, has endowed him with authority, his authority. And that word authority, auctoritas, I believe in the Latin, actually is where we get the root word author. That's in that author. So what we're called to do as fathers is to use our authority to write the story of God's glory in our children's lives. And so how can we do that? And I really, I've written so much about this, and I speak about it, but really the human father his job is to be a link between God the Father and his children, between heaven and earth. He is called to be the face that is of the Father that his children cannot see, the voice of the Father that his children cannot hear, and the touch of the Heavenly Father that his children cannot feel. And it's all biblical, okay? And there's many ways to do this, but until we understand fundamentally that this is our role and our responsibility is to be that presence of God the Father to our children, what we can do is we can accidentally eclipse that presence of the Father from our children. And it has devastating effects. So
exactly. Damages that last. And yes, it's so good. And I think I just want to state this, Sam, before you jump in, is that in order to be the image of God the Father to our kids, we have to know God the Father. We have to know his love for us, and we have to know him actively living in our lives right now. And I don't want to even call them ripple effects because it's bigger than that, but the actual direct effects, the transformative effects that it will have in the lives of our kids, it knows no bounds and knows no measure and can't be equated, but it is what we're called to do. Sam?
So yeah, I really think this idea that of love and respect and boundaries and like finding this golden mean could all be summarized in this idea that I think children need both conditional love and unconditional love at the same time, in the sense that if you have only conditional love, what that looks like is basically abusive. The kind of like what John was saying about discipline without love, right? Like you can break your children very easily with this approach, in the sense that if you measure up to my standards, if you do what I say, if you do what I want, then I will love you.
Right.
And that can be really devastating to kids because they don't feel that fundamentally that love is unconditional, right? But on the flip side, unconditional love, in the sense that is like an imperfect unconditional love, in the sense that I have no boundaries, I have no expectations, I have no rules. It's just this kind of big, fluffy, amorphous, like, I want you to feel good, right? And I want you to like me, and like it can be this very devolved thing. So again, we have kind of two poles or two extremes, but I think the healthiest form has both, right? Like, I love you, I care for you. Nothing will ever change that. Very much like the father and the prodigal son, right? Like his son broke his heart, but he still ran to meet him, right? There's this unconditional love. There's this safety and security, and that my father will never stop loving me, right? and he always wills my good, and he always wants what's best for me, and he's always there for me, and he'll pick me up when I fall, and like just this deep security, right? But there's also this awareness that dad has expectations, where it's like, I want to push you a little bit. Like, I want you to achieve your full potential. I want you to be who God created you to be. I want you to be the best version of you because I love you. And like, I'm not going to let you sink to the lowest common denominator. And I think of my kids when we've been doing household chores after dinner, things like that, since they were very small. And now they're getting pretty old and they've been doing this for a while. So when I come in the kitchen after my son supposedly swept and I'm crunching on things, there's crumbs visibly everywhere. And he's like, "Oh, I did it, Dad. I did a good job." And I'm like, I'm sorry. No, like I expect more because I know you're capable of more. Amen. And you're going to redo it until it's done right. Like, I don't let it slide because I want him to like me. And he usually gets very upset and like takes it very, he gets very defensive and things like that. But I still have to call him on it. I still have to challenge him to more. And my daughters do the same thing sometimes where they just, take the lazy route or whatever.
Yes.
And I have to call him on that. That's my responsibility as a father. That's kind of what I'm getting at with this love with some expectations, love with some conditions. Because it's for their good. It's not about you, right? It's about them and them being who God made them to be.
Yeah. Is it all right if we just kind of cap this with like 4 specific ways that dads can, apply this? Okay. Yeah. I just think that number 1 is discipline and enforce your family law, your ethics, your culture by also, so you enforce it, but by building up and encouraging. You're always looking to the good end. I want you to be the greatest you can be, son, or, I'm doing this so that when you grow up, you will be virtuous and, you won't be like the losers out there. So discipline and enforce family law, but by building up and encouraging. And then second is choose your children versus just accepting them. Just don't live with them, but choose them. So stop, look, and listen and be present to your child on a daily basis. Okay. That means spending time with them, listening to them, getting into their world. And then 3 is be demanding, like you're saying, Sam, but by demonstration. So you are setting the example. You're demanding on yourself in your faith. You're demanding on yourself in your work. You're demanding on yourself in the way that you handle your household. Okay, fine. You can lay those demands at some level on your children while building them up, but you work together. You train and discipline that child by your example. And in that way, you can be demanding because they see you doing it. They're doing it with you. And then they can begin to lay those demands on themselves. And then the 4th thing is consistent affirmation. Find something to affirm in them, whether it's their humor, their personality, the way they look, the way they dress, whatever it is, just taking out the trash, but consistent affirmation and affection, physical affection, hugs, kisses, blessings, all that offered with words of hope about their future and their life. That's so essential. So those 4 things I think are so good to being that link between the Father in heaven and our children.
Excellent. I'm going to put those in the show notes. Yeah, Sam.
One last thing I'll say very quick is that values are seeds that are planted and they sometimes take time to grow. So I was talking about my son, like throwing a little bit of a fit when I call him on it and not doing a good job. Okay, just realize that maybe now they might push back, they might complain, they might whine, they might not like you enforcing rules or boundaries, but give it 10 years, give it 5 years, whatever. And those things that you're instilling in them will bear fruit. I know for my life, like there's things my parents instilled in me that I hated when I was younger, but I look back and I'm like, I'm glad they did that because it shaped who I became. Amen. So just know that sometimes patience and it'll come.
Excellent. Yeah, what a wonderful talk, man. I'm really grateful that we can talk about this. Now, for us and for our listeners here, I want to go right in and I want to talk about one of our listeners' questions here. So this is a question about spiritual attacks and handling that. So allow me to turn this on and we can listen to it now.
Thank you for taking my question. How do we protect our children from the forces of evil? I feel the more that I become passionate about my role as their father, the more spiritual attacks I experience, and the more my children respond negatively to my attempts to guide and correct them. I would love to hear your thoughts about the spiritual warfare side of parenting and what can be done to protect as well as better my relationship with them.
Excellent. Before we dive in, I want to thank Billy, who often reads a lot of these. Billy is moving on to better things in life, and so he will be departing from the Catholic Gentleman and his work here. I couldn't be more happy for him, though. It's great decisions and movements for his family. I just want to thank Billy for years now of help in the backgrounds, and please offer up your prayers. If you're looking for something to do, looking for somebody looking to help the Catholic Gentleman, definitely don't hesitate to shoot me an email. But all right, let's talk about this question right here. What a good question, right? This idea of spiritual attacks, and the more that he is invested in his children's lives, the more he starts experiencing this sort of disruption, if you will, like what we're talking about. He didn't say disrespect, but kind of this sort of divide, and he starts feeling, that he said spiritual attacks, when and his children are responding negatively. And I do think we're ignorant to that in the world. And we've talked about it a lot, that Satan has one agenda, and that is to thwart Christ, and by doing so, thwart the family, right? Because when he can break down the father, he can break down the family. When he can break down the family, he can break down society. He can continue to attack effectively at all levels. So we've talked about this a lot, but Devin, I'd love to hear your thoughts right out the gate here about why this gentleman is experiencing that, as well as some things that he should be doing to protect himself and his children.
Well, I mean, first of all, he's the target. Strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. I mean, so the devil is trying to strike the father down. And obviously the attacks are, Satan does this. He's like in the desert with Jesus. He's like, prove yourself. Or, you know what? You can take the easy way out and just bow down to me. And so Satan does that with us all the time. He's like, hey, if you're going to stay on this vocational path called fatherhood, I'm going to make this very difficult for you. I'm going to make it very painful for you. And so the devil's actually, and the demons are actually testing this man. That's all part of it. There's continually patterns and cycles where we're being tested by the evil spirits to see how much guts do we have, how serious are we about this. And then God comes to our aid, like with Elijah with the bread and all that. God comes to our aid, and he delivers us from the cycle. So that's the first thing. You are under attack. You are the target, because if you go down, everyone else goes down, most likely. That's very important. However, there is another part to this that's very important. I noticed you said kind of like when I'm guiding them or I'm trying to tell them, I can't remember the exact two words you used.
Yeah, correct them, guide and
correct them,
yep.
And guide them,
yeah.
Right. Okay, so that's the defense in a sense. I mean, like we can have the defensive approach, which is, okay, when something's going wrong, I need to correct, I need to guide, all that. But there is something else here. A lot of times when we get in this mode of spiritual warfare, especially with our children, we see all the problems. All of a sudden, our children are like little devils. We see every little infraction and every little error, and then we're like, gotta correct that. Oh my gosh, true. That kid's going to be a demon. Correct that. And by that very suppression of that child's not only going to feel hated, unwanted, undesired, but that child will end up rebelling, okay, because of that repression. Okay, so this is very important. The greatest, they say, the greatest defense is a good offense, the greatest offense is a great defense.
That's right.
I don't know. Yeah. But imagine your football team if you only went out on the field with your defense. You'd score no points. Everything hinges on you making sure the opponent scores no points. In the spiritual life, that will never happen. So you have to have an offense, okay? And so what is your offense? St. John of the Cross, where there is no love, put love, and there will be love. So the key is if your child thinks and believes and knows in the depth of their heart that they have your attention, affection, that you desire them, that you choose them, that you delight in them, you spend time with them and you prove to them that, they are more willing to listen to your counsels and your directives because they know they have your love. But and this is a key. If they sniff out that there's this absence there, they don't feel chosen, don't feel delighted in, don't feel approved, then what's going to happen is when you guide them, when you direct them, they're not going to listen because they don't think you have their best interest at heart. So like Christ. Why do we listen to Christ's counsels? Well, yeah, they're gems. The truth is such great light in our dark world. However, why do we listen to Christ? Because he put his money where his mouth is. He lived what he taught. He died on a cross. He sacrificed himself. He gives himself generously and infinitely to us. I can trust him. That's what a good father does.
Yeah, just goes back to all the stuff that we've been talking about right here in the lesson, or in this lesson, in this episode here. Especially when I think it's great. Not at all. Sam, additional thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with everything Devin said. I would just say about resistance or like spiritual attacks. Don't take this the wrong way, but good. Like that means you're doing something. And often when we try to course correct in life, when we try to change directions, there's going to be resistance. It's like, floating down a river on an inner tube. And then all of a sudden you jump out of that and try to walk upstream, right? Like it's going to be hard. There's going to be resistance. And the fact that you're being attacked means that you're doing something. You're moving in the right direction, most likely. Now, of course, there's nuances to that. I don't know all of your circumstances or anything. The other thing about your children, though, would just be, they're resisting you, and just do a little of examination of conscience. Like, is it because of something I'm doing? As in, I'm coming on too strong, I'm being too harsh, I'm being too dictatorial. Like, is there anything I can do? In addition to Devin's kind of examination of like offense versus defense, is there anything that I'm doing that needs to change? Maybe they're resisting you because you're enforcing rules about things that you used to tolerate. Like, for example, they're playing a bunch of video games or watching TV shows that you suddenly you woke up to the fact that this isn't good for my family. This is actually harming my family. And we're going to cut back on that. And then there's a backlash. I don't like that because I really like attached to these shows or games or whatever. Like, is it about that? Like, is it about your approach and how you're saying it? So just do a little examination of conscience there. Like God, am I doing this in a way that pleases you? In a way that is in accord with the love that Christ showed on earth. Like, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So Christ is kind of our template, our example, right? Even though he wasn't a earthly father in that sense, but like he's the face of the Father. And is this a Christ-like way to approach this? And then like, if you have examined your heart and you feel confident that you're not coming on too strong, you're not being dictatorial, you have love in your heart, like Devin's describing, like you're approaching this with love and gentleness and winsomeness, and they're still resisting you. Okay. Some of that might just come with the territory, in the sense that you're trying to lead your family, maybe for the first time. Maybe you've kind of been one of those abdicating fathers before. And like, you're trying to step into a more authentic leadership role in your family, and your kids don't like that. Well, okay, there might be no avoiding that, because following Christ, like, you're not always going to be popular, but do examine your heart. So I'll just leave it there. But
if I could just add something too, is just meet your children where they're at. Like literally so God the Father, he, in Jesus Christ, he comes down to our level, but he doesn't stay there. It's in order to lift us up and exalt us and ascend, so we can ascend to the Father. But we've got to assess psychologically, mentally, physically, emotionally, all of that. We need to assess what level each of our children are on, and then try to meet them at that level, and then gradually draw them up. I mean, the fact that Jesus Christ walks this journey patiently and gradually with us should be the ultimate example of, wow, I need to do that with my children. And so I guess a message to all fathers is, you're in it for the long haul or you're not in it, because you have to walk it gradually and patiently, and don't demand your child to be the saint today. It's going to take the rest of their life, and you're not even a saint yet, probably, right? So you got to walk that with them. And so just try to meet them where they're at, and just acknowledge them where they're at. That goes up so far when you acknowledge them where they're at, and in order to gradually draw them back to the Father's love. Man, it's But if we just force our rules and our expectations upon them, they will rebel against that.
Yeah. Devin, Sam, such great wisdom. I really appreciate those answers. I'm glad that I got out of the way so that I could just listen. I couldn't agree more. And I just from a spiritual side, I'd like to add that there are things, right, that you can do, right? You should enthrone your house in the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary. You should absolutely daily be blessing your kids. Daily, you should be bathing them in the precious blood of Jesus. We've talked about this on other episodes. There's a really great book. Hey, I've got it right here. Deliverance Prayers that Father Ripperger came out with. I would definitely ask for Our Lady's mantle of protection to be around you and around them. But if all of those things still seem to fail, they absolutely need to be there, right? There is just the reality of our lives and our relationship with our children, with their maturity level and with where they're at and with how we've been parenting and how we are now parenting. All of those things play in, and we would be foolish not to be aware of that in pursuing a better path for ourselves and for our family and for our children. So I really appreciate that question. Yeah, Devin.
And remember, a father's success is not based on his children's faithfulness. It's based on his faithfulness to his children.
Excellent. So thank you for that question. If you have any other questions, if you're listening to this, send them to us at podcast@catholicgentleman.com. The burning question, any question, we'd love to answer them. Please send it over there. So here we are at a point in the episode where we talk about putting on the new man. This is the challenge to men to become better. My challenge for you men is to do something with your kids out of the ordinary this month. So give yourself a little bit of time. You can do it with your wife or without her. In fact, if you've got a lot of kids still in the home, take them away. Give your wife some downtime where you are taking all your children. And I can say this, I got 6. And so I've done this. I'll take all 6, including an 8-month-old. And so no excuses, right? Find time to do something special with them. Go on a picnic, go to a beach or something along those lines. That's my challenge for you. If you are a father whose kids have all left the house, then your obligation is to call one of them out of the ordinary, right, out of the blue, right? Take an extra step to give them a call, to give them of your time to still be the father that they need. So that's the challenge, putting on the new man this week. Hey, so if you liked what we talked about here on the public episode of Catholic Gentlemen, you want to get more of this, more of these episodes every single week, plus all those sessions, ebooks, challenges, head over to CatholicGentlemanPlus.com. We hope to see you in there. I'm really grateful for you men, grateful for all our listeners. You're in our prayers. And as we end each of our episodes,
be a man, be a saint.